Oh, got it.
All right. Morning, everybody. We're a little late. This is Tuesday and the Senate Transportation Committee. And we have just one item on the agenda this morning. That's the cuts to Green Mountain Transit Service. And I think Senator Purchase, you had some questions about.
Definitely. Thank you, Chair. I had received several emails from folks that were surprised and dismayed about the cuts. So was just trying to find some more information about the cuts and what the plan is going forward. I saw there's a public hearing coming up, but I wanted GMT to give a chance to give us an update on the cuts and hear from Ross from AOT from his perspective and what it is that we can do about it.
Okay, questions? Who would like to take the lead on that?
Either Bonnie or John.
Bonnie?
So I can start off from a GMT perspective. So our FY23 budget was balanced with about a 4.5% level of service reductions. We've been facing some challenging budgetary times for about 10 years, so this is not anything new. We've been able to avoid service reductions in the past, largely through using some of our reserve funding, some internal efficiencies, mostly on the administrative staffing side, and then also realigning, redesigning, and actually transferring some of our services to lower cost providers within the state, working with Ross and VTrans. And then largely Ross and the Public Transit Division being a great partner of GMT's in bailing us out in past situations. I think at this point, based on those things, as well as record high fuel prices, which are going to hit our budget even more than anticipated, upwards of $400,000 if fuel stays at $4 a gallon. In addition to the fact that while our ridership is rebounding, we're still only at about 80% of pre-pandemic levels. And with our fare projections for FY23, we're assuming about $600,000 less in fare revenue than we collected pre-pandemic. You couple that with, modest wage increases that we budgeted at about 2.5%, and then our typical insurance increases, which have been competitive on the health insurance side at about 6%, but it still adds up. All of that combined has led us to a situation where the only way to balance our budget at this point is through these service reductions. As you mentioned, Senator, we do have public hearings scheduled for next week. We have 2 in Burlington, and then our planning staff will be spending an entire afternoon at the Montpelier Transit Center to speak to the Montpelier Link passengers. So at this point, we've developed some proposals, and once we solicit the public comment, staff will develop a recommendation to the board for any permanent service changes. And just to be clear, we are proposing 4 daily round trip reductions on the Montpelier Link, but that's only about $50,000 of the $250,000 we're saving with the service reductions. The remainder of those savings would be by reducing rush hour frequencies on our North Avenue and Shelburne Road routes from operating every 20 minutes so that they'd operate every 30 minutes. So we understand the challenges and the inconvenience that will cause to our passengers, but we're taking as many steps to mitigate any negative impacts in a cost efficient manner.
Thank you for that. And the 2 things that I heard, one is people were surprised by it, like they didn't feel like they got notice of it. So I don't know if that's normal or it's just because of their emergency situation and it had to happen quickly. And so I'd like you to respond to that. And then also, if you comment on the fare free, I can't remember what your budget was for going forward in fiscal year 23. You talked about a reduction in fares, so that made me think that and I think I remembered you were talking about starting to collect fees and not be 100% fare free going forward. But I'd hate for us to say we're fare free, but we're lacking revenue, so we're going to cut service. The people that can no longer take the bus, because even though there's other buses, because childcare, schools, they can't take the other times. So now they're driving 90 miles a day. They would pay $25 a bus trip to take the bus. So one of their comments was, I don't want it to be free if it means I can't take the bus. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, those two items.
Yeah, good questions. So number one, on the notification period, whenever there are service reductions, they're not desirable by the company, and they're certainly not desirable by the passengers that use those services. But we're not proposing any service reductions to begin until June 15th. And the public hearing process is really designed to get that public feedback. So even if we were to move forward with the full service reductions, we would look at the public comment, and we would solicit travel preferences, and we would redesign the schedules. So there may be fewer trips, but we would try to redesign those departure times around travel preferences, and then to try to match as closely as possible the trip departures that currently exist. So that may be, for the Montpelier Link, for example, the buses may not operate as frequently, but we would try to match the span of service. So I know one concern is that there's about an 8 o'clock trip northbound leaving Montpelier. The proposal right now is to eliminate that. And even if that trip goes away, we would look at adjusting the previous trip to make that, split the difference. And there is some confusion because we have already implemented some temporary service changes, which will do mirror the existing proposal for the reductions, the permanent reductions. The temporary service changes were based on staffing concerns due to COVID. So I think that's a unique situation that typically doesn't happen when we propose service reductions. In terms of the fare revenue, we did provide some written testimony, and included in that is a strong support by GMT of the House passed transportation bill that does include $1.43 million in fare replacement revenue. Until that is confirmed, we are anticipating to start collecting fares in FY23 on July 1st. And when we budgeted that amount, we based that off of current ridership projections. So our service levels are essentially based off about $2.2 million in fare collection. But based on our current ridership projections, we're only anticipating collecting about 1.4 to 1.6 million in fare revenue. So that's where that delta comes in. So we are planning, absent any legislative funding, for fare revenue replacement to restart fares on July 5th. But even with that, it's not going to be at the pre-pandemic levels.
So just to be clear, the temporary changes to the schedule do mirror what the proposal is to make permanent.
That is correct.
And the temporary ones that kind of caught some people off guard, that was because of staffing and COVID concerns.
Yes, luckily our staffing challenges haven't materialized, but we have a multi-month internal process to make schedule changes. We did this when the positivity case rate was 15%. So, but yes, the temporary changes match the proposed permanent changes.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
We talked about this a while ago, in the 1.4 and the $1.6 million of what you could collect starting July 1st had come up. And I remember myself saying that, well, that's part of the pieces of the puzzle. I'd like to see, it'd be nice to maybe roll back your plan to start on July 1st and maybe collect some monies earlier than that. But free is free until it isn't free anymore, and it sounds like you've run out of money. We've heard Senator Perchlik say that there's people that express that they would be willing to pay the fare, and maybe your estimates of 1.4, 1.6, maybe it might go up. Maybe you might find the revenues if you were able to charge accordingly for the service that people wish to have. The best time, I'm in business, the best time to make money is when people want a service. And I'd like to see it before July 1st. You guys collecting fares, but you have your business model. I understand that. And that's just where I'm at with that thought.
Yes, Senator Chip, go ahead.
So two things, but on that point, I'm under the impression that if we approve this budget, then you'll continue fare free after July 1st, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But my other question that I raised my hand for somewhat ties to Senator Perchlik's point. I understand these temporary changes hit some people by surprise. Could you refresh our committee's understanding of how you did communicate, how you do communicate these changes? Do we have a listserv for regular riders? Do you use Front Porch Forum? What efforts did you take? Because I am hearing from many constituents as well that felt taken aback or in surprise and honestly frustrated with those service changes. Could you tell us what you did do to communicate to our regular riders?
Sure. Good question. For the temporary service changes, we did focus on social media outreach as well as our website posting. And we do have electronic boards at both our downtown transit center in Burlington as well as our Montpelier Transit Center. So we did advertise on those. I think we have learned from some of our mistakes with the temporary notification. We have started using Front Porch Forum to advertise the permanent proposals for the public hearings. We'll also be doing some on-site Montpelier Transit Center direct outreach, as I mentioned, as well as onboard flyers. So hopefully the passengers that will be impacted will at least get the notification now, so they can, number one, attend the public hearings and provide comment through emails or phone calls if they can't attend. And then number two, so that they're aware of these service changes. We will also be reaching out to a list of businesses and educational institutions once any service changes are identified, so that employers and local schools can distribute that information as well.
Yes, Senator Kitchell.
One of the things that is hard to register here is a lot of your costs are going to be associated with the high cost of fuel. It's hard to imagine that we don't have more robust ridership for something that is free, and particularly now with the cost of gasoline. And I don't know if maybe it'll catch up in terms of what that ridership demand will be. And that does get into the fares. I mean, it seems like we have this, two alternatives, free or.
Well, it's going to be convenient, otherwise it won't take.
That's right. So
simple as that.
So that's the hard part, is when you start constraining services, then you run into the problem that people are talking about, and that schedule and so forth, which then drives them to drive, which is not exactly what we want to promote. And it just seems like, do you have some sense of if you did institute fees or earlier in this environment where driving your own car is certainly not going to be a cost-effective alternative, what that might look like, and how do we've talked about how do we promote and how do we get ridership up? And in this environment where everybody's talking about climate change and reduction of carbon emissions, et cetera, it's kind of discouraging that we're not seeing a better trend here.
So that's a great point. And historically, when fuel prices increase, so does transit ridership. The one variable at this time is teleworking, especially if you look at our commuter routes. Those by far and away are the routes that are the slowest to rebound. Our local core routes in Chittenden County are back to about 90% of pre-pandemic ridership. So those routes are coming back. But the Montpelier Link, for example, is only operating at 30% of the pre-pandemic ridership. So that's taken a massive hit. And I think the logical conclusion is the increase in teleworking, which is good for the environment, does reduce vehicle miles traveled. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it certainly does impact commuter route ridership.
Any other questions, comments?
Just want to hear from Ross.
Nope. Okay, Ross.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Ross McDonald, Public Transit Program Manager at VTrans. And I've been made aware of these potential cuts. I was told that those were generally stemming from some recommendations in their previous transportation development plan, which really gets in the nitty gritty of each route and efficiencies, ridership, best coverage, those types of considerations. When we think about transit in Vermont, we have to remind ourselves the bifurcation of urban and rural. And in rural, with our funds that we've received from COVID relief, we're able to maintain fare free for FY23. Because we're so different than the rural system, traditionally we would receive about 3 to 9% of the operations from fares, where you could be 35% or more with something like the Link Express. When we look at rural, 50% of our services pre-pandemic were already free or zero fare. And same with John, as we see ridership ticking up and things returning to pre-pandemic levels, we were estimating about a $400,000 gap to maintain fare free rather than the $575 or $565 that we were receiving pre-pandemic. And in the rural system, we're more like 70% of pre-pandemic across the board, but those commuter routes are lagging on the others. So we will continue to stay flexible. There's always the budget and operations you plan for, the ones that you respond to, and then the ones you wished you had at the end of that fiscal year. We'll maintain our flexibility and try to respond to the changing demands throughout the state with our urban partner as well as all of our rurals. The last item I wanted to just make sure was the fare free on the rural system is coming from COVID relief funds rather than 50-50 splits on federal, non-federal for operations. We'll spend down the majority of our remaining COVID funds to cover 100% of the operations for those routes around the state. That will save state funds as well as local funds for future activities. So that's where we are. We'll continue to look through the applications as they come to us at the end of next month, and provide assistance to the greatest extent possible to all of our providers and partners.
Questions for Ross? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bonnie, anything you'd like to add to the conversation?
If I could just thank you for the opportunity to speak. If I could just add in that the fare-free service, the proposal is a good one, and there are ways that it can benefit the transit agencies, but it's a one-to-one exchange of funds. It isn't the permanent solution to what GMT and other transit agencies might be facing related to the sustainability of the transit financing model in Vermont. And I know that you heard from CCRPC and other entities. I apologize for the construction in the background with your knocks and noises. But that study looked at, why isn't the current model a model that will work into the future, and what are some options? And one of the reasons it won't work into the future is in part because it relies on the local property tax to raise funds for our local match. Fares are one portion of that match, but they're not the only portion. And when you look at how local communities and local business contributes, frankly, outside of Chittenden County in the rural area, 3 municipalities, maybe 4, and 2 businesses, the ski areas, support the majority of the match for the rider system in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, in Lamoille County, and in central Vermont. It's a little bit untenable, and there are communities that choose not to contribute to transit either because they can't or it's not a priority for their budgets. So I'm just going to encourage you to take a look at that study. It's not an issue that's going to go away. GMT and some other entities in transit are going to be facing those issues into the future, and we'll reach a point, and we are reaching that point, I call it the cliff. The cliff is, will we continue to provide the level of service we have? Will we reduce that service into the future because we simply don't have the federal or the local match to pull down the federal funds that are available? So I will encourage you in that direction, and thank you for letting me add that into the comments.
Thank you very much. Any questions, committee?
Just really
Yeah. go ahead.
quickly, John, how much money are you saving with the the link bus cuts?
So just for the link cuts, based on our budgetary number, which assumes $2.75 a gallon for fuel, we paid $4.40 yesterday. So it's a little outdated. For the link stuff, about 50,000.
For the whole, for what time period?
That would be for FY23.
Does that mean that if you had $50,000, you wouldn't need to cut it? Or there's other issues that it's not just a money question?
Well, we wouldn't need to cut it in FY23. We've already done some projections for our 24 budget, and it's even worse than our 23 situation. But and that's just for the link cuts. That's not for the entire proposal. But
Right.
yes, if we had that amount for 23, we could likely continue that service.
Tires are impossible to buy this year. They're going to double the price. I talked to a dealer yesterday. You can't get winter tires. They're impossible to get. Tires are going up $200-300 over what they were. It's crazy. Yeah. Okay.
Good place to put some of that million.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your appearance this morning. We'll stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Okay, Jeannie,